Welcome everyone. It is 3 p.m. and it's time for a server room show. This is episode 27. Thank you for SDF Public Unix Systems for hosting the server. This time I didn't mess it up. Just a quick intro as always. You can follow this live. We are back again with the live video feed during the live show. So you can go to twitch.tv/Victor Madaras to watch the video feed, or you can listen as always on Anon Radio station, anonradio.net/listen if you only want the audio. And later on you can go grab the recordings either from the archives or from the podcast and the video archive links, which you find on victormadaras.freeshell.net. That was all the intro, and as always I managed to keep it under 1 minute because previously people gave me that much feedback that I spent too much time on this. Episode 27, what it means that I went schizophrenic, I think, as I did already 26 episodes of this, and I do one per week, then it means that we already did half a year worth of material. If we count that 1 year has 52 weeks, then 26 would be the half of it, and we are already over half a year. I had to use the calculator to calculate all of this. That's how bad I'm in math. Today I would like to talk about some topics which I'm getting more and more interested in, but also more and more confused, and sometimes it's a bit hard for me to grasp all the underlying things and the principles, and definitely licensing will be one of the things I'll mention. Licensing, I don't mean to do it as a spoiler, but it's a big mess. So I see some of you came online today to listen to this, and I heard that one of the listeners is a black cat actually, and its owner. I think that the cat is explaining to the owner when he doesn't understand something, so the cat leads the way. So what I want to talk about today is this whole open source and closed source software, a little bit of the Free Software Foundation and what they do, what I think I managed to figure out what they do or what they believe in, and a little bit about licensing, open source, free open source licensing. As I mentioned, it's a big mess. I was trying to wrap my head around it, and well, it's definitely not an easy topic. There is more than 80 different free open source licenses out there. So of course there are a few big names like the BSD or Berkeley license, and the ones from the Free Software Foundation, the GPL version 2 and version 3, but we will talk about in a bit. So open source software, what does it mean? Why people care so much about that, and how they tie it together with the Free Software Foundation? Open source means literally, if you translate the words on its own one by one, that the source code of the software is open and available, and you can most of the time, of course depending on those licensing we will mention later on, most of the time, in a very general sense of the meaning, you can practically do what you want with it, and you can study it, you can modify it, you can make your own variant of it, you can fork your own from it, as long as you give it back your modifications, or make sure that you provide the whatever you make out of it back to the community the same way, under the same licensing, open, so others can learn from it. So then you can probably figure out that the other end of this equation is the closed source software, which is what we more familiar with. You think of any big corporate application, you think of any Microsoft application, or name any other. Those applications have copyright on them, and it makes them, it allows them to keep their software source code closed source. So they don't need and they cannot be obliged to open up the code and share it with the masses and show them how they do or what exactly it contains. And many people has the main issue with this, that as they cannot see what is behind closed source, they immediately associate of malicious or ill will activity from part of whoever wrote the software and made it closed source. However, as far as I see, where many of these questions I wrote down in the show notes, which came to my mind, I see it more as a form of protecting intellectual property, because as you start to think about it, if you make a software and let's say you sell it for $1 or €1, it does something simple. Let's say, I don't know, something very simple. It records audio or copy paste text or whatever you want, and you decide to sell it for $1. If you're doing it in open source, you let the code there out and open. What stops any individual to get this code? Let's say you put it on GitHub and fork his or her own version from it, maybe even modifying just a line, or maybe not even slightly modifying your original code, or maybe yes, most of the time no. And what stops this individual or even a corporation to use this piece of software of yours, which you are selling for $1 or €1 for free, in a case of an individual, most probably not for gaining profit with your intellectual property you created, but in a case of a corporation, it's more than possible that they use it for creating value, which they sell or charge on to their customers. So you as a developer, then if you would say, okay, I also have to make a living, and I created X piece of application, and what can I do if I make my code open source? Then everyone will just take my application I created, and no one will, or maybe a very small percentage of people will support me on whatever way they can, purchasing the software or donating or whatever, while the rest of the bigger percentage will just walk away smiling. So it starts this dilemma to be open source or closed source, and if really what is closed source, is it all of them evil, or for the purpose of being evil, or only just to protect their livelihood or their income source? I think it's not so easy to there is, it's no black and white. And when we come to the part of talking about the Free Software Foundation, as much as I see or saw, I was watching many talks from Richard Stallman, who is the founder of the Free Software Foundation. As far as I know, yeah, he is. Um, it sounded to me that those guys see the things very black and white. And I know I don't really talk about politics, but in a very to put it in a political expression, if closed source is capitalist, then open source in their interpretation of the Free Software Foundation, as much as I were able to understand, it's maybe because of my monkey brain, but it seemed to me something very socialist and utopist, where only black and white exist, and someone is or someone's intents either evil or good, and there is no gray in between. Whereas the previous explanation I just did about a single developer who wants to charge, let's say, €1 for his simple application, does he closed sourcing his application for his evil and ill intent motives, or he really just don't want people to walk away with his creation or property, intellectual property, and not to contribute back, so to say, in a monetary sense. And interestingly enough, when you look at software, it's a big debate of open source and closed source and this and that. But let's look at from another point of view, and I think that's also interesting. But when we don't look at software, let's look at Coca-Cola. I don't drink it. I don't like it. I think it's evil. But anyone who likes it, I'm sorry. But let's look at Coca-Cola. It's not software, but as a intellectual property, as an intellectual product, its recipe or the way how you make Coca-Cola and things which makes it unique and whatever, it's obviously a corporate secret. It's we could say the source is closed. You cannot learn the know-how or the secret or how to make Coca-Cola. It's not out there in the public, and you cannot go read it and make your own variant of it. You can guess. Guessing is always free. Also in software, you can guess how a software is doing what it's doing, and you can try creating and mimic the same functionality or look and feel. We saw that from, for example, it's no pun intended, but Chinese manufacturers many times are perfectly copying the look and feel. Either mostly I saw it in hardware. So you look at some of the Chinese Android phones, and some of them perfectly mimics the look and feel of knowingly Apple devices. Or you look at the Huawei's this MateBook series, and tell me it doesn't remind you immediately of a MacBook Air or MacBook Pro, and tell me that it is not intentional. So somehow when it comes to anything else but software, the debate is not this harsh about you as a corporation can protect your own property or know-how or the way of making it, like in the case of Coca-Cola. I don't really see organizations demanding Coca-Cola or Pepsi to release the recipe so the masses can learn from it, can fork their own, or kinds of like this, like the Free Software Foundation is saying. I know it's a different product and it's a completely different category, but I just like to emphasize on the difference that when we're talking about another category, somehow the same rules not applying. However, there are similarities or resemblance, because both things are a product of a company, just as much as Coca-Cola is the product of the, I think, the Coca-Cola company in this case, but it's not a software. And let's say Microsoft Office is the property of Microsoft, and somehow it makes Microsoft evil not sharing the source code of its application, so people immediately think that it's an ill will intent, whereas in you go 10 meters to the left and another company, maybe even bigger than Microsoft, who makes Coca-Cola, no one is banging on their door to share the recipe, because let's say, what if you guys put anything malicious or ill with an ill will? I mean, you tell me, who knows that they didn't put some substance which makes you hook on Coca-Cola like people hook on drugs. You don't know. They didn't show you the recipe. Just like in a case of a software, no one, I mean, you can assume, because you assume whatever you want, no problem about that. But just because you think that they did something wrong, it doesn't mean that it's immediately true. So with this analogy between Coca-Cola as a different type of product and the software, it's actually interesting to think about it. I mean, it's interesting for me, so I make this show. No one else makes any recommendation. No one complains. No one sends emails. No one calls in. So I think I make the decision. It's interesting. I wanted to talk about it. So to continue on that same thought, amongst the many questions I wrote up which came to my mind regarding this topic, can you imagine what would happen if a company like Microsoft would open up the code of Microsoft Office or Visio or project application? Not debating if it's a good application or if there is any viable alternative or anything better exists out as a form of a free software, and they would put up the source code on GitHub. Let's say, how many people would continue paying for the application? I think close to none, or perhaps some companies which are, as always, obliged to be tied into a support contract, which support contracts, in my opinion, as I work in IT, I see that support contracts for companies serves for nothing else but the suits those people in those board meetings. If they mess up anything, they can point the finger to, let's say, we're talking about IT, let's mention Red Hat and their support contract. So if anything goes bad or wrong, and the suit people are being asked what they messed up, and if it was their fault or not, that's out of the question. They can easily point the finger, oh, it was the Red Hat guys, and we have a support contract, and we opened a ticket with them. So it's just to be able to blame someone else, in my opinion, as far as I saw. So yeah, think about how many people would pay for a piece of software like Microsoft Office if it would be open sourced, and you could download for free, apart from being able to purchase with or without a support contract. So it doesn't mean that I don't believe in open source apps. I do, and I do a lot, but I also believe that people or even companies, that when you create something and you want to charge something for it, let's say $1 or €1, you should have the chance to do that. And to mention and to bring in the Free Software Foundation into the mix. In the name Free Software Foundation, they always say that free, they don't mean no cost. They mean free as in freedom, respecting the freedom of the users. They don't immediately mean, they don't mean free as in no cost. Therefore, I assume, as I can assume, I assume that they would have no problem if me, as let's say I develop a software and I say I want to be a freedom respecting developer or a company or whatever, so I make my software open source, so these guys can, the masses can look at my code, they can see that I have no ill intent, I don't want to do anything malicious, and I indeed respect their freedom. And as I just said, they don't have any problem if I want to charge money for it, because free in their interpretation is free as in respecting the freedom to see, to learn, to understand, to modify. I will mention those things. So I can put my price as I just said, I can put my $1 on it. But we mentioned previously that if the app is open sourced and it's out there for anyone to look at or to modify it, or to who will pay for my application? So I'm either shooting myself in the foot or what's happening. That's what I'm trying to say, that the world is not black and white, there is gray in between. And that's exactly I don't know how the Free Software Foundation want to how they say that free is not free as in no cost, because each time I look at their name, when you say Free Software Foundation, free for me immediately means no cost, but they say no, free as in freedom respecting. So you are okay with the cost, but I think somehow you all know, if the source is open and you can just go to let's say again to GitHub, download the source of Microsoft Office, and I can build it on my computer, it would be awesome, and I could finally run it natively on Linux. Actually, I would love to run Visio on Linux. It would be awesome. Short side note that Microsoft and all this, this big marketing whoosh lately, that they are this much in love with Linux, they are that much in love with open source. All of it is very nice, but until they don't make Office and for me, most importantly, Visio available for Linux natively, I'm not saying for free, charge me, I don't care, but as long as they don't make it available for Linux platform for the fee or whatever it is, that's their decision. Until that point, I cannot believe that they are really committed to either to Linux nor to the open source community, because I think the biggest application we all could benefit from, even though I love LibreOffice, it's not that, but the biggest jump and benefit for me as a user from Microsoft, I mean, I don't need DirectX support for the underlying Windows subsystem for Linux. So I can use graphical applications out from Windows subsystem for Linux, because I can just install an Xserver software for free, and I can just send my GUI applications from WSL from there. But it's not even the argument here. When they make these important Office applications available also on the Linux platform, that's when I will believe that their commitment to Linux and open source is indeed true and honest. Up until that point, this whole thing is just a facade for me, to be honest. It's just a big smoke window, big whoosh. But that's just me. So the Free Software Foundation, I was saying that I have a hard time understanding their method of free, but they mean freedom instead of no cost. But then how would I benefit, or how would I be not ripped off as a developer or a company for my goodwill and being good to the community, opening up my software source, and being left without a penny. It's an open debate, I think, and an open question. I will try to learn more about it, and if I can, I will maybe do a second part on this. Licensing, open source licensing, as I mentioned in the beginning, there are many different ones, and more than 80. Mainly they are in two big categories. This much I could decipher from all the information: permissive and copyleft licenses. The permissive, like the Berkeley BSD Berkeley licenses, or the MIT or Apache 2, they are, as the name suggests, very permissive. You can basically do whatever you want with the code. You can use it at your own risk. You just need to acknowledge the author or contributor. The copyleft licenses, which adds additional requirements to the permissive licenses and requirements. So that's where it's getting mushy and very complex. And if someone knows more about it, please teach me or send me an email. What I saw was that in those cases, sometimes it makes it hard to incorporate open source pieces into a closed source project, because sometimes it's either incompatible with the certain licensing types, or it could open you up to a situation where you are kind of expected or forced to open up parts of your closed source just because you used a piece of an open source application, open source solution. So maybe you would be obliged to open up a piece from your closed source which talks directly to this open source piece you took, and things like that. I understood as much as I could. So it's complex, and in this case the best in this sense is the BSD licenses, which are the most permissive. Definitely they have less gain than copyleft license, which wants, so to say, something back. So yeah, time flew away. So thank you very much for listening, and see you next Saturday for more.